environment right now. Sarah Montalbano, which is probably the fifth different way I've pronounced that this morning, but I am trying my best, ma'am. I promise. She's joining us from the Alaska Policy Forum and Young Voices. How are you, ma'am?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
We're doing as best as we can and trying to get through it as best we can, as I'm sure a lot of folks are. Uh, we joke on this show about going from the mountains to the coast. We're from the coast to the far extremity of America, talking about Alaska here. We kind of let in joking about the gas prices a little bit, but the truth is those are affected by policies, and there's policies going on in Alaska right now on top of the Keystone Pipeline and top of other things in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge that you've been writing on. But kind of help people understand, though, when they're talking about ANWR, we're talking about something the size of South Carolina here, and we're talking about trying to maybe utilize for economic purposes kind of a very small bit of that, isn't it true?
Absolutely. The Arctic National Wildlife Refuge has immense oil and gas reserves. And up until recently, there were some gas and oil leases being sold in ANWR, but Biden has suspended those and is putting those leases through another review process, which is costing taxpayers millions to do these studies that we've already done and effectively killing the project through those delays.
Now, the reason those projects get killed that way is because when they have a federal lease, that is supposed to be pretty much a lockstep contract. And then when you bury it into another regulatory form, now you've just put it off, usually by years, even if they approve it. Now the companies that were going to work into these areas, they have to kind of start from scratch all over again, don't they? So they just move on to something else.
Absolutely. It's very hard to maintain investment in Alaska when it flip-flops every 4 years, depending on who's president.
Why do you think ANWR is such a flashpoint? I know it sounds one way, and there's nowhere on earth as beautiful as Alaska in a lot of ways. We understand that. We do want to conserve it. Why do you think ANWR has kind of become that flashpoint for a lot of this stuff?
I think part of it's the name. I think thinking about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge makes you think that you can't do anything else in there safely. It makes you think every square inch is covered with plants and animals that we're trying to preserve. But the reality is that a lot of this is tundra, and tundra is a very sensitive environment, absolutely. But some development could be done very safely here, as long as, proper environmental precautions were taken.
Yeah. Talk about, too, there's some unique regulations to the Alaska environment that the rest of the country probably isn't really aware of. Can you explain the Roadless Rule and how that's been infected now, but it's actually been appealed and reapplied a couple times over the years? Recently in 2005, it was repealed under Bush. Now it's back again. Can you explain how some really kind of interesting regulation that may not sound right to the rest of us when it's explained, but it's kind of unique to Alaska, but it explains the government back and forth policies that's kind of holding a lot of this stuff up?
Absolutely. So the Roadless Rule in Alaska really affects the Tongass National Forest, which is the only temperate rainforest in the world. It's one of our largest national forests in America. And so the Roadless Rule prevents logging and mining and other road projects. And that affects a lot of acreage nationally. But in the Tongass alone, it affects 9 million acres. 9 million acres are completely off the table. And so in late 2020, President Trump finally decided to give the Tongass National Forest an exemption from this to allow the Forest Service to even start considering some of these roadless inventoried areas, as they call them, considering those for logging and mining projects, which would be really good for Alaska's economy and our energy independence. But this Biden recently reversed in early spring here. He put it back into place to put this off limits. But the thing that really gets me is that you can apply for exemptions for this, and there have been exemptions overwhelmingly approved to do these projects in the Tongass. And so in effect, what really happens is just a lot of red tape to get these projects developing.
And how does this affect the folks in Alaska? Not just because, this obviously is economic. They want to work jobs. They want to do things like this. But how does it feel for the Alaskan folks to understand that, I ran into this when I lived in Nevada. Nevada is like 90% owned by the government. What does it do to the Alaskan folks that live there, the American citizens, when so much of not only the land, but their economy is tied up to the whims of the government, and a government that changes with each election. And a lot of what you have rightly called virtue signaling, because it's wildlife refuge or rainforest, and they get tied up in that, that's got to hurt the perception of the people that they are in control of their own lives like a normal American citizen would be.
It absolutely does. 60% of Alaska's land is owned by the federal government. Less than 1% of Alaska's land is actually in the hand of private owners. And so that just kind of means that communities can't feel ownership over Alaska's resources, and we can't really be invested in long-term conservation because we know whatever projects we undertake are going to be reversed by the next presidency. We know that is true for long-term conservation and for development. And so I really think something that would help this is to return some land to those who really understand the issues better. It's really frustrating for Alaskans to know that federal bureaucrats are making all these decisions for us, and people that have never set foot in the state are taking this ownership that we should rightly have.
Sarah Montalbano joining us from Young Voices in the Alaska Policy Forum. It's more than just flip-flopping, though, isn't it? You brought it up to my attention. I didn't know this. But part of the issue with the Songus Forest was that there was actually a promise of development. So in other words, there was a promise of investing money as a payoff for foregoing the economic independence from the government. And then that kind of gets pulled out under the rug. This does not help the impression that they're being kind of used more as puppets than as citizens in the Alaska areas when something like economic development is dangled and then it's just taken away along with the control.
Absolutely. The thing that's happened here is that once this roadless rule is reinstated, the USDA said, look, here's $25 million. We're going to put it towards sustainable community development instead of whatever development you guys were planning. And I think what's really frustrating about that is that we don't know if our development could have been done safely because we haven't been allowed to try. It's just been prevented completely. And that really leaves us dependent on handouts from the federal government. I don't think we're not going to accept that. I think we will have to accept that payoff. But it also leaves us dependent on tourism, and that was really hard on our state during this pandemic. Tourism completely shut down, and we were left without a major pillar of our economy. And I think that's increasingly going to be the status quo, especially in this kind of administration.
It's interesting you bring that up because something that I think is universal across America. We talk about Alaska. What does that have to do with coastal Carolina? We're a tourist-heavy community. We have the beaches. It's a little different type of tourism, but it's still tourism. But like they say here, we're living where you vacation. They have to live here, so they want the conservation, but they also want to be able to make an economic living. They want people to come in and enjoy it and show it off a little bit, and they want to make money doing it. Is it not a universal thing that we see these things in Alaska, but the government that can do this in Alaska is probably going to find ways to do this in other parts of the country as well, correct?
Absolutely. And I think Biden's taken a few concerning steps on the national level. And the one I just want to highlight is the 30 by 30 initiative,
yes.
Which is supposed to, for some reason, conserve 30% of America's lands by 2030, which is very sparse on details. We don't know how the Biden administration plans to do that. But that's something that's going to be a nationwide kind of land grab almost.
Why 30? Is it just a number they picked out of the sky? Was there, we're tired of hearing about, was there science behind that? Where did that 30% number come up? Or is it just another one of these signal things of like, 30% by 2030 sounds real good on a white paper. Let's go with that.
I believe about 12% of America's lands are permanently conserved right now, and I think they like the 30 number because it's about double that. I don't know where the science comes from. They have been extremely sparse on that. Their fact sheet does not have any citations. It's really concerning, and they do not describe how they're going to do this, if they're going to seize land from farmers and disregard all the conservation that farmers do already. So we're going to have to just kind of wait and see how that goes.
Yeah, that's a sad way to do governance. Sarah Montalbano joining us again. What do you think's the fix for some of this stuff? Obviously, a lot of this is getting done by executive edict, and we see how that's going. Is it a legislative process you think is the path forward? Is there a legal process where we try to maybe reinstate some individual property rights? Do the states themselves try to assert some authority over, federal land and try to get some of that back to the states that we've seen in recent years? In your opinion, looking over these things, where's the course of action? Is it either or, all of the above? What do you think?
I think for now, the biggest thing that would have to be done is returning more land to the states. I think that's going to be a little easier right now than to try and transfer into private owners. But I think the ideal situation for conservation is one where private owners can choose to keep some land for conservation. They can sell it to do development, or they can sell it to the highest bidder, and those bidders can buy it for conservation. I think an ideal system wouldn't need a massive web of federal government lands in order to actually preserve these wildlands that we love so much.
Yeah, Sarah Montalbano, thank you so much for your time today. Tell folks where they can find your stuff. You're at the Alaska Policy Forum. You're writing for Young Daily. You're writing in the Wall Street Journal, Anchorage Daily, all over the place. Tell folks what you have going on, so they can follow you and continue to learn about these issues and these terminologies like the 30-30 rule that are going to be maybe coming on down the road a little bit.
Absolutely. You can find my works predominantly on alaskapolicyforum.org. That's where I work. That's going to be having most of my articles. I'm also a Young Voices contributor, so you can find me there. And I also have a Twitter feed, so you can really try and find me there as well at Sarah Montalbano.
Montalbano. How was I close? Did I do okay with that? I was trying really hard.
Yeah, that was perfect. No, it was great. Thank you.
When you let the hillbillies on an audio only format, weird things happen with names. So I appreciate your patience and I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for your insight today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Have a great